I've spent over 20 years working closely with executives in transition. And for most of that time, there was a question I kept coming back to, one I couldn't quite get to grips with. I'd watched people join platforms, right? Franchises, licensed concepts, consulting networks, all kinds of structures where somebody had already done the hard work of building the model. The brand was there, the infrastructure was there, the support systems were there, and some of those people absolutely flourished. They absolutely loved it, they built something real, and you could see pretty quickly that it was going to compound for them. Others, with the same access to exactly the same brand, the same tools, same support, never quite made it inside the system. They weren't less experienced or less capable, and I kept wondering, what in the world is actually going on here? Because I couldn't put it down to luck, right, or market conditions, or the quality of the platform they joined. The pattern was just, too consistent for any of that. Something else was determining the outcome of joining a platform. Something kind of ahead of that, and took me a long time, and honestly more example than I'd like to admit, to understand what was going on. And once I realized it, it changed how I think about every conversation I have with executives who are about to make that kind of move into a platform. I'm Arndt Halbach. I've spent the last 20 years working with actually over 1,000 senior executives across 50 countries to help them build independent practices that are genuinely theirs. That experience is what the second curve architecture is built on. And now I want to talk about what amplifiers are in that context. So let me explain what I mean by amplifiers. Because the name only makes sense when you understand what they're supposed to do. In the second curve architecture, amplifiers sit in layer 2. There are 3 of them: platforms, partners with real skin in the game, and thought leadership. And they generally are powerful. A well-chosen platform can hand you things that would take you years to build on your own. Positioning the market already recognizes. Packaging tested across thousands of engagements. A peer network that actually teaches you something. None of that is actually small, and I'm not dismissing any of it. But they're called amplifiers for a reason, and they amplify what's already there. Because if the foundation isn't in place, if you haven't genuinely worked out your own positioning, the specific problem you solve, where your particular combination of experience creates value that others can't easily replicate, well then the amplifiers don't have anything really to work with. They will amplify the avoidance of that question instead. A platform with strong positioning can carry you for a while, and a partnership can generate early activity for you. But without a real personal foundation underneath, doubts will start to build for you. When a client pushes back, when your pipeline gets slow, you'll find yourself asking questions that should have been answered at the start. Is this really mine? Does this actually reflect what I'm bringing? Am I building something here, or am I just holding on to something maybe? When you arrive having done the work, the platform becomes kind of a lens, right? When you arrive needing the structure it offers, it will become a life raft. And quite honestly, life rafts don't build practices. There's a concept from the startup world really that I think applies directly to this transition. It's called founder market fit. In a startup context, it describes the alignment between the founder's specific background, instincts, experience, and the market they're trying to build it in. Not whether they are capable of it in the abstract. I think the concept is whether they're specifically suited to it in a way that gives them a genuine advantage, right? And the question is this the right person for this particular problem? Not generically talented, but specifically matching to this market problem. And that question applies directly to every executive building what I call their second curve. And it's the one question most people skip, not because they're being lazy, but because it takes time to answer honestly. And there's always something more active and exciting that you could be doing instead, right? But what is your founder market fit? Where does your specific combination of experience, pattern recognition, and judgment create value that others can't easily replicate? What problems have you actually solved at scale that the market will be paying for? Where have you consistently been the person in the room that others turn to, not because of your title, but because of what you knew about that particular issue? These aren't rhetorical questions. I think they are absolutely foundational. And in my experience, reaching answers that are both honest and useful can take you months of real reflection, not a weekend with an empty notebook. It's going to be months potentially. Now, the market will eventually expose any answer that isn't grounded in reality, I think. But really working through the question properly, which is uncomfortable, I know, is what builds the foundation everything else rests on. Here's the slightly uncomfortable truth about who falls into this trap most reliably. And it's not the executives who lack drive. It's very much the opposite. The people I've seen avoid this question are the experienced, the action-oriented leaders who spent decades in environments that generally rewarded decisiveness. Sitting with an open question like that about your own positioning doesn't feel like work. It feels like you're just avoiding things or stalling. And stalling is not something senior executives are comfortable with, right? So joining a platform, that will feel like progress. Signing a partnership agreement feels like you're building something, moving forward. And any forward movement really, feels better than sitting with the discomfort of not yet having the answer to a really hard question. And the genuinely tricky part is that the very qualities that made you effective in your first curve, the bias towards action, the instinct to build, the low tolerance for ambiguity, they make you particularly vulnerable to this in your second curve. And I'm not saying don't use platforms. No, quite the opposite. I'm not saying don't build partnerships. The second curve architecture is explicit about the value they carry when the timing is right. What I'm saying is do the work first. Then the amplifiers actually amplify something that's real and that is going to be sustainable. When you arrive at a platform or a partnership, having genuinely done the layer 1 work, when you know your positioning, the specific problems you solve, the clients for whom you create the most value, something fundamentally different happens. The platform structure stops being something that you need. It becomes something that you actually can evaluate. You can look at it and ask, whoa, does this really map to where I genuinely create value? Does the packaging and the brand reflect the kind of work I do best? Does their pricing logic sit right relative to what I actually want to deliver and how I want to deliver? And if the fit is real, if the answer to those questions is yes, you'll be entering a partnership as an equal on eye level. Not as somebody borrowing that structure, but as someone who brings a defined contribution to that engagement, and it's something you will share. And that's when the amplifiers actually work, because you're amplifying something that already exists, that already has clarity in your own mind, and that is genuinely yours. So there's a test I would like to give you. When you're thinking about moving towards maybe a franchise or a license concept or a membership in a global network, before you do, write down in your own words, without borrowing anyone else's language, what specific problem do I solve, for whom, and why you specifically? If the answer is clear, considered, and honest, you're ready. Then joining a platform will be an amplifier. It will be worth it. If you're reaching for the platform's language to answer that question rather than your own language, that's not a reason to stop, it's just a signal. The layer 1 work isn't done yet, potentially. And that's completely fine. It just means that's where to start, right? Architecture sits in the right order, and you need to get that order right. The full framework, all the 3 layers, every component of level 1, how it all connects, is in the anchor video on this channel. Link is in the description, and I'll see you in the next one.